Morning, everyone. So we're going to do traditional tales again today. Can you remember what you would find in a traditional tale? There are stories that you've heard over and over again that your parents or other adult, special adult in your life has told and has been told by their adults or parents. So says my doggy too. They normally have a happy ever after. Sometimes they can start with once upon a time. They sometimes have animals that speak in them. They're set in a far, far away land. They can have, did I say animals that speak in them? They can have a king or a queen in them and princesses. They can have magical creatures in them. Magic in them. And enchanted things. Language that happens over and over again, repetition, repeated language. Now, with that in mind, remember I'm reading from fairy tales from the original source of some fairy tales, from the Grimm's fairy tale stories, and I've chosen one today. This is one of my favourites. It's called Briar Rose. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen, and they reigned in a country a great way off, where there were in those days fairies. Now this king and queen had plenty of money and plenty of fine clothes to wear, plenty of good things to eat and drink, and a coach to ride out in every single day. But though they had been married many, many years, they had no children. And this upset them very, very much indeed. One day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river, at the bottom of the garden, she saw a poor little fish that had thrown itself out of the water by an accident, and it lay gasping and was nearly dead by the bank. The queen took pity on the little fish and threw it back again into the river, and before it swam away, it lifted its head out of the water and said, "I know what your wish is, and it shall be fulfilled. In return for the kindness you have shown me, you will soon have a daughter." What the little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen did have a little daughter, so very beautiful that the king could not cease looking on her for joy, and said he would hold a great feast and make merry and show the child to all the land. So he asked his kinsmen and nobles and friends and neighbours. But the queen said, "I will have the fairies also, that they might be kind and good to our little daughter." Now there were 13 fairies in the kingdom, but as the king and queen had only 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of, they were forced to leave one of the fairies without asking her. So 12 fairies came, each with a high red cape on her head, and red shoes with high heels on their feet, and a long white wand in their hand. And after the feast was over, they gathered round in a ring and gave all of their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her goodness, another beauty, another riches, and so on until she had all that was good in the world. Just as 11 had done their blessing, a great noise was heard in the courtyard, and word was brought forward that the 13th fairy had come, with a black cap on her head, black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand. Presently she came into the dining room. Now, as she had not been asked to the feast, she was very angry, and scolded the king and queen very much, and set to take her revenge. She cried out, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead." Do you know which story this is? Then the 12th of the friendly fairies who had not yet given her gift came forward and said that the evil wish must be fulfilled, but that she could soften its mischief by her gift, and that the king's daughter, when the spindle wounded her, should not really die, but would only fall asleep for 100 years. Do you know the story yet? However, the king hoped still to save his dear child from the threatened evil, so he ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom should be brought up and burnt. But all the gifts of the 11 fairies were in the meantime fulfilled. The princess was very beautiful and very well behaved, good and wise, and everyone who knew her loved her. It happened that on the very day she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home in the castle, and she was left alone in the palace. She roamed about by herself and looked at all of the rooms and the chambers, till at last she came to an old tower, into which there was a narrow staircase ending with a little door. In the door there was a golden key, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there sat an old lady, spinning away very busily. "Why, how now, good lady?" said the princess. "What are you doing there?" "Spinning," said the old lady, and nodded her head, humming a tune, while buzz went the wheel. "How prettily that little thing turns around," said the princess, and took the spindle and began to try and spin. But scarcely had she touched it before the fairy's prophecy was fulfilled. The spindle wounded her, and she fell down lifeless on the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep sleep, and the king and the queen, who had just come home, and all their court, fell asleep too. The horses slept in the stables, the dogs in the court, the pigeons on the housetop, and the very flies slept upon the walls. Even the fire on the hearth left off blazing and went to sleep. The jack stopped, the spit that was turning about with a goose upon it for the king's dinner stood still, and the cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a boxing on the ears for something he had done wrong, let him go, and they both fell fast asleep. The butler, who was slyly tasting the ale, fell asleep with the jug at his lips, and everything stood still and slept soundly. A large hedge of thorns soon grew around the palace, and every year it became higher and thicker, till at last the old palace was surrounded and hidden, so that not even the roof or the chimneys could be seen. But there went a report through all of the land of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so that was the king's daughter's name. And time to time several kings' sons came and tried to break through the thicket into the palace. This, however, none of them could do, for the thorns and bushes laid hold of them as if it were hands, and there they stuck fast and died, stuck into the bushes. After many, many years there came a king's son into the land, and an old man told him the story of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, and how a wonderful princess called Briar Rose lay in it, asleep with all her court. He too told her how he had heard from his grandfather that many and many princes had come and had tried to break through the thicket, but they had all stuck fast in it and died. The young prince said, I shall not be frightened by this. I will go and see this Briar Rose." The old man tried to stop him, but he was bent upon it. Now that very day 100 years had come to an end, and as the prince came to the thicket he saw nothing but beautiful flowering shrubs, through which he went with ease, and they shut in after him as thick as ever. He came at last to the palace, and there in the court lay the dogs fast asleep, horses standing in their stables, on the roof sat the pigeons, all asleep, heads tucked under their wings. He came up into the palace, the flies still asleep on the walls, the spit with the goose standing still. The butler had his jug of ale still at his lips, going to drink. The maid sat with a bird in her lap, ready to pluck it. And the cook in the kitchen was still holding up her hand as if she was going to hit the boy. He went on farther, farther into the castle, and all was so still he could hear every breath he took, till at last he came to the old tower, and opened the door, the little room in which Briar Rose was, and there she lay fast asleep on the couch by the window. She looked so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her, so he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But the moment he kissed her, she opened her eyes and woke up, and smiled upon him, and they went out together. And soon the king and queen also awoke, and all of the court, and gazed on each other with great wonder. The horses shook themselves, the dogs jumped up and barked, the pigeons took their heads from under their wings and looked about and flew into the fields. The flies on the walls buzzed again, the fire in the kitchen blazed up, around went the jack, and round went the spit with the goose for the king's dinner upon it. The butler finished his drink, the maid went on plucking the bird, and the cook gave the boy that box around the ears. And from then the prince and Briar Rose were married, and the wedding feast was given, and they lived happily ever after all their lives long. Now, you know that story is Sleeping Beauty, but it was originally called Briar Rose, written by the Grimm brothers. And it's one of my very favourite stories. So that's your story for today. I hope you enjoyed it, but you already know it anyway, Cinderella. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.